all right? So here's a blast from the past. Check out this little chart that I have here up on the screen. If it looks a little blurry, don't adjust your glasses, you're okay. When I expanded it, I realized it got a little blurry. What is that? It's an eye chart, right? And I say it's a blast from the past because I can remember even back when I was in elementary school, I think it was once a year, we would go into the nurse's office and she'd have this chart on the wall and she'd give us an eye test to see whether or not we needed glasses. I honestly don't know if they do that anymore in schools. Some of you guys who are teachers, do you know that? Do they do that still? Anybody know? Yeah? Okay, so I remember, doing this multiple times when I was a kid, and as I got to adulthood, I went for years and years without having an eye test because I felt like my eyes were fine. I'm a reader. Everybody told me that at 40 I'd have to get glasses. I made it to 45, but now I have to wear glasses. I haven't done an eye test like this on a wall like I did as a kid for many years. Now you look, through a little thing on a computer, but it's the same concept, right? It's to test your vision, to see how you're doing. Well, today, as we continue our journey through the Gospel of John, we come to chapter 9, which is a really interesting, fascinating, thought-provoking story that actually has to do with vision. And today, as we read this story, we're going to, I think, in one way, shape, or form, all be taking an eye exam. And you'll understand that better in a few minutes. It's a spiritual eye exam. For out of this story bubbles an answer to the following question, which I hope you can have in your mind as we read the story together. According to Jesus, who is blind and who can see? According to Jesus, who is blind and who can see? So I'd like to invite you this morning to get a Bible opened up or turned on to John chapter 9. We're going to read today the whole story because it's really impossible to just read parts of the story and figure out what's going on in the story. So we're going to read all 41 verses. I will be reading today from the New Living Translation. I hope to be able to read it well. I practiced this week so I could hopefully read it well. And I also have lots of practice because I read with my grandkids all the time. So if you want to follow along in your own copy of the scriptures, that's awesome. If you'd rather just listen, that's okay too. But whether you follow along or just listen, I'd like you to have that question in the back of your mind, according to Jesus, who is blind and who can see. And I'd also like to invite you to try to put yourself in the sandals of the blind man in the story. So there are several, characters in the story, several people and groups of people. But I would like you to try to imagine that you're the blind man in the story as we read the story together. I'll read the story without much comment. This is one of those Sundays where a preacher, a pastor, a speaker wishes he had maybe 2 to 3 hours because there's so much in this story that's so fascinating and so interesting. There are so many cultural details that I could speak to you about that I just don't have time to. So hopefully you could go home and maybe dig into that on your own if you want to a little bit. There's just so much amazing stuff here. But I'll read it pretty much with very little comment as we go along just because I want to be respectful of your time today. Okay, so the context is Jesus remains in the city of Jerusalem. And as we come to chapter 9, verse 1, here's what we read. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. So Jesus is just walking towards wherever he's going, and he sees the blind man doesn't see him, right? So he sees a blind man, and this man was blind from birth. He'd never seen anything. Think about that. Only darkness. That's all he knew. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? I imagine Jesus stopping. I don't know if he did because the Bible doesn't say it, but I imagine Jesus stopping, and it's kind of like, boys, I want to have a word with you. I got to correct your theology. You see, the disciples were thinking in that moment that this man was blind because he had committed some sin, or because maybe his parents had committed some sin, and he was suffering the consequences. It's the same mentality that some of Job's friends had. Do you remember that? Where people, for one reason or another, thought that if something bad happened to you or you were going through some difficulty, it was because of some sin you had committed or some sin a family member had committed, and you were suffering the consequences. And Jesus in verse 3 says, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. I told you there was a lot of stuff that's profound here that could take a long time to assimilate. But just think about that briefly. Even in life's great difficulties and maybe injustices, there's purpose. Purpose. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. So it's almost like Jesus says, all right, guys, I reminded you, that you're thinking wrong. I've corrected your theology, but now it's time for me to get to work because I don't have much time left. And I'm not here just to talk about theology. I'm here to help people. So then, verse 6, he spit on the ground. By the way, if I was reading with my grandkids, I'd probably have some sound effects here, but I'll spare you those details, but maybe you can imagine them. Hey, just think about this. Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. What did that sound like? What did that feel like? Remember, you're supposed to be imagining you're the blind man. What are you thinking right now and feeling? I mean, I hope I don't gross you out by saying this, but how much spit does it take to make enough mud to cover a blind man's two eyes? Right? How long did this take? But the blind man obviously cooperates. He lets Jesus do what Jesus did. And then Jesus told him, verse 7, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. I mean, that's a super short sentence, just full of all kinds of stuff to try to ponder and assimilate, right? So archaeologists say that walk was probably about a quarter of a mile from where Jesus encountered this guy close to the Temple Mount to the pool of Siloam. So maybe, I don't know if this is real accurate, but just think like we're coming here from the church down to the Delta gas station down the street. Can you imagine this? So you're a blind guy with two big old mud patches on your eye walking in the pool of Siloam. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you hearing from the people around you? He acted in faith, right? And he does this crazy thing that Jesus tells him to do. First of all, he cooperates with getting two mud patties put on his eyes. And then he walks a quarter of a mile to a pool, goes into the pool, washes off his eyes, and he comes out and he can see. For the first time in his life, he sees a tree. He sees the pool that he got in. He sees water. He sees clouds and the sun if it was out. He sees people's faces that he's only ever heard their voices. He sees what the religious leaders were all dressed up like. He sees the streets that he used to walk along begging because he was blind. For the first time in his life, he sees all this stuff in rojo vivo, in living color. His neighbors, verse 8, and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, others said, nah, he just looks like him. So it's like you have a double, right? Un doble. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. Yes, I'm the guy. I am that blind beggar that used to be around all the time asking for money. I'm the guy. I'm the same guy. But now I can see. And then they asked, well, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. I don't know, he replied. The last time he was with Jesus, he was getting mud put on his eyes. And hearing Jesus' voice saying, go wash in the pool of Siloam. That's the last he knew about Jesus. Now he has no idea where Jesus is. In fact, he has no idea what Jesus looks like, right? He has no idea. So they're like, where is he? I don't know. I have no idea. Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. Ay, ay, ay. Rules more important than people. This happened on Saturday. Nah, you can't make mud on Saturday, that's work. Nah, you can't heal somebody on Saturday, that's work. No. No está bien. So they take him to the Pharisees. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, he put the mud over my eyes, and when I washed it away, I could see. You think he's getting tired of having to repeat the story over and over? Nobody believes him. Well, some of the Pharisees said, verse 16, this man Jesus is not from God, for he's working on the Sabbath. Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? So there was a deep division of opinion among them. So it's like, dame que te doy, sí, no, yeah, no. The Pharisees are arguing amongst each other. Then the Pharisees, verse 17, again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? The man replied, I think he must be a prophet. I mean, he must be somehow, some religious something. I mean, there's something special about him, something supernatural. I was blind and now I can see. I don't know, I think he must be a prophet. But the Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man had been blind and could now see. So they called his parents. They asked them, is this your son? Was he born blind? And if so, how can he now see? So they can't, on the basis of what they've talked with the blind man, who can now see with what they've talked with him about. They can't figure it out, so now they're going to mom and dad. They're like, really? Was this guy really blind? I mean, if he was, like, how can he see now? Well, his parents replied, verse 20, we know this is our son and that he was born blind. So they affirm that. Like, this is our boy and he was born blind. But we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself. Probably that means he was either in his 20s or 30s. Taking into account the language that's used here and the culture and so forth, most Bible scholars believe he was probably in his 20s or 30s. So probably a young adult. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, he's old enough, ask him. Those are some sad verses, aren't they? Think about that for a minute. Like, these parents were more concerned about their reputation than the well-being of their son. There are parents today who are like that too. So that's not the point of this story, and I don't want to get on a rabbit trail, but think about that. And that's really sad, right? I mean, these guys knew it was their boy. And they knew better than anybody that he'd never seen anything in his life. He was born blind. Like, they were the first ones to receive him when he was born. So they knew better than anybody that it was their boy and he'd been born blind. But they were so concerned about themselves and their reputation that they had no compassion and could not even celebrate the fact that now their boy could see. Qué triste, right? That's crazy. So, verse 24, for the second time they called in the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this, because we know this man Jesus is a sinner. So don't promote or compliment Jesus for this, because Jesus is just a sinner. Praise God for it, but not Jesus. Well, I don't know whether he's a sinner, the man replied, but I do know this. I was blind and now I can see. But what did he do, they asked. How did he heal you? If I was reading this with my grandkids, I would raise my voice and probably shout and hoot and holler, because I think this young man must have been so frustrated by this point with these guys who wouldn't believe his story. In my Bible, I have some exclamation marks and so on and so forth that I think try to emphasize that, and the terminology emphasizes it too. Look, the man exclaimed, I told you once, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? How's that for a little sarcasm? He's so fed up with these religious leaders. It's like, what do I do with these guys? So he just lets it all out. Lets it all out. Then they cursed him and said, so this is really intense. They cursed him and said, well, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. Now listen to this. This is classic. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he came from? So wait a minute. Aren't these guys experts in the Old Testament scriptures? Don't the Old Testament scriptures, particularly, for example, in the book of Isaiah, clearly say that Messiah would open the eyes of the blind? So this guy's like, come on, guys. He opened my eyes. You guys know that the Old Testament says that Messiah will open the eyes of the blind. And you say you don't know where he came from? Touche, right? We know, he keeps saying, we know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he could not have done it. Well, I mean, these religious leaders were just as fed up with this guy as he was with them, right? It's a very tense situation. And they certainly were intelligent men. And they absolutely understood that he had completely won the argument. So the only thing they had left to do was yell and scream back at him and kick him out of the synagogue. So it says, "You were born a total sinner," they answered. "Are you trying to teach us?" And they threw him out of the synagogue. Fuera! I mean, I told you this was an amazing, interesting, thought-provoking story. It's full of intrigue and tension. There's so much to unpack. But are you feeling what this blind man must have been going through? He's trying to assimilate this crazy thing that just happened to him. This explosion of sight that he's never, ever experienced in his life. He's also trying to assimilate who Jesus is, why in the world. I mean, wouldn't you think the people around you would be happy for you? And nobody's happy for him. How much time passes between verses 34 and 35? We don't know. It appears that it was the same day, so probably not too much time. Verse 35 says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man. By the way, could I just stop there for a minute? In chapter 9, verse 1, who found who? Jesus found the blind man. The blind man didn't find Jesus, right? In 9:35, who found who? The blind man wasn't even looking for Jesus. Well, the blind man who is now no longer blind. He wasn't looking for Jesus. In fact, I already said this, but it's true. He had no idea what Jesus looked like. But Jesus heard all of this craziness that was going on, and he went and found the man, and he asked him this really powerful, important question. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Son of Man is a term that Jesus liked to use when referring to himself, right? Do you believe? Maybe Jesus said some other things to him. I don't know. But that's what we have recorded. So that's the important part of what Jesus wanted to communicate to him, right? Do you believe? Do you believe? Do you believe in the Son of Man? The man answered, Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. So the man who had been born blind, who could now see, he's not clear about who the Son of Man is, right? He's got some confusion rattling around in his brain at this moment too. Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. You have seen him, Jesus said. Seen him. You have seen him. First time in his whole life. You have seen him, and he is speaking to you. Yes, Lord, I believe. I believe, the man said. And what did he do? And he worshiped Jesus. Man, what a powerful moment. What did that look like? What did that feel like? What did that sound like? Did he fall to his knees? Did he grab Jesus and hug him and jump around with him? I don't know. Yes, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped Jesus. And then Jesus told him, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. Some Pharisees who were standing nearby heard him and asked, Are you saying we're blind? So they'd seen this whole thing. They were there. They saw the man believe and worship Jesus. And then Jesus says this, really profound thing, that he's come to give sight to the blind and to show those who think they see that they're blind. And the Pharisees knew that Jesus was talking about them. That's why they asked, right? They knew it. They're like, are you talking about us? And Jesus said in verse 41, if you were blind, like if you were really blind, you would not be guilty, Jesus replied. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see. We have an expression in Spanish that I don't really know if we have an equivalent one in English, but no hay peor ciego que el que no quiera ver. No hay peor ciego que el que no quiera ver. There's nobody more blind than someone who doesn't want to see. How'd I do? Sounds better in Spanish, right? Oh, well. Some stuff sounds better in Spanish and some stuff sounds better in English. It's kind of like, I don't know, let's say you need to get from point A to point B. And you get in your car and you're like, oh, I know how to get there. I don't need a map. And you're all full of yourself and full of pride and confidence that you can get to point A, from point A to point B with no help. And then you get lost and make a mess of everything. Versus a person who needs to get from point A to point B and humbly recognizes the fact that they don't really know the route to get there. So, yeah, give me the map. I'll look at it, and I'll be guided by the map. So as I think about this story and this question and the answer that bubbles out, this is how I have decided to express it. According to Jesus, those who proudly reject him are blind, while those who humbly believe in him can see. Jesus took a physical event and turned it into a spiritual lesson moment, right? Those who proudly reject Jesus are blind, while those who humbly believe in him can see. So this blind beggar received 2 miracles that day, right? One physical and one spiritual. He was gifted with physical sight being restored, and he was gifted with spiritual sight being restored. Think about these several possibilities. There could be a person who has physical blindness, but spiritual sight, right? I have some friends like that. They can't see with their eyes, they're blind, but spiritually they can see clearly. They've clearly embraced belief in Jesus. So that's a possible scenario, right? You could also have a person who could see physically, but be spiritually blind. There are lots of people like that. Maybe there's somebody here today like that, or watching on the internet. You're walking around and you can see with your physical eyes, but spiritually you're blind because you've rejected Jesus. So you can't really see. You're blind because it's the spiritual seeing or blindness that really matters, right? Another possible scenario could be that you could be physically blind and spiritually blind, right? Or another possibility would be that, and I think this probably applies to most of us that are here in the room today, probably most people that would be watching online right now as well, you could have physical sight and spiritual sight. Right? So I don't know which of those descriptions best fits you, but I'd like to invite you to think about that. And remember that the most important sight is not physical sight. It's spiritual sight. And in this context of this story that we've read together this morning, spiritual sight means believing in Jesus. Believing in Jesus. If I had time today, and I don't, so you've been saved by the bell. But, man, I'd love to walk around this room and stand in front of each and every one of you and ask you that question that Jesus asked the blind man who could now see. Do you believe? That's a really, really important question. Do you believe? Do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus is the Messiah? Do you believe that Jesus came to be your Savior? Do you believe? 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 And it occurs to me that there are 2 kind of basic general answers. One would be how the blind man who could now see answered, right? Yes, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped. And the other main possibility would be to continue to maintain the posture of the religious leaders who in their prideful self-confidence refused to believe. If you're here today and I would have maybe had the opportunity to walk around the room and ask you, do you believe? Do you believe? Do you believe? And if your answer would have been yes, can I just remind you of something really important? Just like in the story with the blind man, how Jesus went and found him and not the other way around. According to the Bible, we're all born dead in trespasses and sin, with no ability to find Jesus in and of ourselves. He has to find us first. And if you are here today and say, yes, Lord, I believe, remember how privileged you are, because not everybody gets to say that. If you're here today and you have spiritual sight because you have embraced belief in Jesus, you are a privileged person. And I hope you will leave this place today and live a life that's worthy of that privilege that you have been granted. And it's not just a kind of once off, I'm going to worship you, Jesus, because of that, because we know that worship is a lifestyle. So for those of us here today who have been privileged with the gift of spiritual sight, may we leave this place and live lives of worship that are worthy of that great gift. Amen? And if there happens to be somebody in the room today, or perhaps watching online, maybe now or maybe later, and if I would have had the opportunity to walk around the room or ask you, do you believe? And you would have to honestly say, no, I don't. I just want to invite you today to believe. I mean, certainly you have seen God's hand in one way or another in your life. Certainly you've seen that. Certainly you have seen God's powerful hand in the life of somebody that you know. I beg you not to be like the religious leaders in this story, where all they had seen and all they knew about Jesus, who had checked all the boxes. How many miracles had they already seen up until John 9 that are recorded in John 1 through 8? It's check after check. He's the Messiah. He's the Messiah. He's the Messiah. He's the Messiah. And now he does this thing that nobody ever before had done. He opened the eyes of a man born blind. And the scriptures said from Old Testament times that the Messiah would open the eyes of the blind, and still unbelief. I beg you, I plead with you today. Believe. Believe. Jesus came to offer you spiritual sight. And just like that blind man, when he saw for the first time clouds and trees and sky and people, there are some things that you will never experience until you can see. So believe. Let God open your spiritual eyes. And I'm not saying life will be perfect after that, but it'll be totally different. Because you're going to be living in full color. Full, beautiful color. After God opens those dark eyes.